I want to thank you all for coming. We have 45 minutes, which seems like a lot of time, but it's really not, to talk about two things that are really important to us, which is the Project Approval Lifecycle, PAL, and the success of that, and how it interrelates with organizational change management and some of the precepts that go with that as well. So it's funny, you know, you look at how many people look at the titles for all these presentations today, and you have to say, what do they really mean when they're looking at those things? I mean, you know, yeah. So we didn't title this, but we're working with it. So actually, if we had to title it, I think we would have gone with this. This is the one presentation today not about Agile. So what are we here to talk about? Well, first I want to introduce both our firm and then Randy and I, and then we'll get into the topics that we have outlined for you today. So just about the Highlands Consulting Group, we were founded in 2002. We're a small local firm. We have over 240 projects. We have a real passion for both the feasibility study report, or the PAL process, as well as organizational change management. Randy's one of the certified trainers for organizational change management in the state of California. It's really fantastic. We've worked on small, medium, large California IT projects, and I guess what that means is that each project at different sizes have different characteristics, and we're familiar with the characteristics at those levels and how we can help you with that. Also, we're the only PROSCI authorized training provider in California with more than 25 PROSCI certified, change management certified consultants based in Sacramento. And when Randy introduces himself, he's going to talk a little bit more about that. So about us, I'm Eric Norton, and it says here I have 20 years of IT planning and implementation experience. So yes, I am that old. And you know what this does, one thing I want to pull out with this is it talks about, you know, FSRs and PALs. I've also I'm a project manager on implementations, and so the important thing that brings to this conversation is that I've been on both the FSR and the PAL side of this, but I've also been on the receiving end of this as well. I've been the vendor on the other side, responding to the RFOs and the RFPs and trying to discern what people meant with their different requirements and the different things they have in there. So I bring both those perspectives into this conversation. Randy?
Good afternoon. My name is Randy Triezenberg, and like Eric, I have many years doing consulting for the state, just a couple years less than him because he's a lot older than I am. And I know I've done consulting for some of you. I see some friendly faces in the audience. My experience was for 15 years. I was with a large system integrator. And during that time and my time with Highlands, I've been in the role of developing strategies, doing business process reengineering, doing change management and training, as well as I've been a project manager. As Eric said, I am a certified instructor for the PROSCI change management methodology. If you're not familiar with PROSCI, PROSCI is a research organization that looks at best practices in change management and is sort of the de facto standard for change management methodologies for a lot of the Fortune 500 companies. It's not the only game in town, but it is one that is increasingly popular here in the state of California. So I'm going to be talking a little bit today about how you can bring change management into your projects earlier than you actually bring on a vendor.
So that's a little bit about us. We want to find out a little bit about you, though. So what I want to see is, how many of you have created in the past an FSR? Good, fair number of you. How many of you are on a current PAL project? All right, you guys are all the guinea pigs. Fantastic. And then also, how many of you have an organizational change experience or organizational change background at all? A few less. Okay. Very good. All right, so, you know, and again, I talk about kind of anyone who's in a PAL process, the process started deploying in 2013, and then that was the stage one, the S1BA, and then the S2AA came out in July 2015, and this year we have both stage 3 and 4. So stage 3, what I characterize these guys as is essentially, you know, stage 1 is really the objectives. Stage 2 is really where you're assessing the feasibility. Stage 3 is where we get into the procurement and how we're going to onboard or select someone. And then stage 4 is vendor selection and project initiation. So again, with both stages 3 and 4 coming out this year, there's a lot that's in flux with all this. And actually, I would say that in talking with CDT, they are very receptive at this point to feedback on the PAL. They're actually setting out opportunities to solicit and collect feedback. So don't think of it as something that's kind of a closed loop. Think of it as something, if you have input on it as we move through these processes, as we're all guinea pigs in these new processes, then it's important to get that feedback to them because they're very receptive to it. So what today is not, what this conversation is not. This conversation is not PAL training. We're not going to talk about the fields, and we're not going to talk about the form, and we're not going to talk about how one stage moves into the next and such. Again, that's all out there. CDT is doing training on those. Contact CDT if you're a state person, and they're giving training about that, and that's all you need to know. What we're here to talk about is really some of the experiences that we had from going through both feasibility study reports and PAL and system implementations as well, and to try and integrate those into the projects that you're currently working on or that you plan to work on, so that then you have a guaranteed chance of more success. And to punctuate that a little bit, I'm going to present to you 2 project schedules. So we have project schedule 1, which is what I call the optimal or semi-optimal schedule optimal. And again, that's influenced by the size of the project, the complexity of the project, the number of business programs in the project. Any one of a number of things change it. But let's just call this an optimal. And what we see with that is we have the stages 1 through 4. Nice little overlap on those. A little bit of a waterfall in there, so we're not talking agile at this point. And then also, the other thing that's important, and we're going to talk about this throughout, is this kind of how we kind of imbue the process with change management so that it helps with adoption and success as the project goes live. So this is potentially the same project, but with a slightly different tack on it. We're going from a 2-year project to a 4-year project. How many of you have heard of a 4-year procurement cycle? How many people, I mean, there are projects out there that have gone through 4, 6, some have gone through 8, some say they're never going to go live projects. And there's a couple things that characterize that. And first of all, on this one, you'll see one of the things that we talk about, every stage is extended, and then also organizational change management just kind of hits as a little boxed in, oh yeah, and we have to do that. But the other thing they're just painful projects. The decision making is unclear. The outcomes are unclear. The review cycles are extended and iterative, highly iterative. And so we're here to talk about some things that we think will help you with that. So we couch that conversation in essentially we want to talk about governance and sponsorship, the business process analysis, objectives, requirements, and then how that all feeds into market research, financial analysis, and then again, as we want to, it's self-serving. We do organizational change management. We have organizational change management at the center of this diagram. So, if we were to move on and talk about governance and sponsorship, it's 2 things. Governance is kind of how the decisions are made, what happens within the project itself, and then the sponsorship is more the role of the sponsors as well, and what we've seen with successful and little longer term projects. So, with regards to governance, there's 2 things that we think that are pretty important with that process. One is having the decision making very, very clear. In other words, who's going to make what decisions when, and then the other is to make sure that you have people who are at each level of review empowered to be there. How often is it that we get people into not just a PAL process, not anything that we're trying to approve? You get someone assigned to your team, they're representing a business area, they're representing an IT project, IT themselves, or anything else, and they go through it, and they're in every meeting, and they make you're going through the review cycle, and you're making the decisions, and then what happens is it gets out, and it goes to the next level, and the person who was representing you from that area, the feedback you get from that area is 400 comments. Well, hey, you had a representative over here, right? So it's very important that at the outset of your project that you make sure that the people who are on your team are empowered, and not just someone who was a special project as necessary, right? And then the final thing with that is also we've dealt with projects that have up to 85 reviewers as we're moving through the process. And what we found to be very helpful with that is we work out what's called a single point of contact, a SPOC, right? And with that single point of contact, the role of that person is to take all the feedback, we work with them on it, but to take all the feedback, because a lot of times we get conflicting feedback. And if we're the writers on it, the editors, the people who are helping to facilitate the process, the conflicting feedback is one of the #1 things that will slow you down. So it's important to have someone who's really empowered and at a higher level as that single point of contact who can make decisions about conflicting feedback and what's in, what's out. Ready?
So what's the change management perspective? Governance is about executive decisions. And you think about your executives making decisions around scope, schedule, cost, resources. Most executives are very aware that that's their role. Best practice research tells us that the #1 predictor of project success is effective, active, and visible sponsorship. And that means active and visible sponsorship from the beginning of the project throughout the project. So not only are there executive decisions, but there are executive actions that sponsors need to take. And I'm going to use sponsors in the plural. Typically when we have an FSR document or a PAL document, we identify a single individual. But it's more than that, just that one person. That one person has to create a coalition of people around himself or herself that is going to be supportive of the project. If you're not going to end up with that 4-year extended procurement, that sponsor has to be getting people on board throughout. The third thing, so active and visible sponsorship, building a coalition of their peers and their subordinates, and communicating directly with employees. So the #1 reason that employees don't adopt a solution is because they lack awareness, not awareness of the project, but awareness of why we're doing it. So if you haven't spelled out the business reasons for why you're embarking on procuring a new solution, and employees don't understand that, then they're not going to have that level of awareness. And project sponsors are directly responsible. They're the person that employees want to hear from with that message. So executives have a governance responsibility that they're probably very aware of. They also have an executive action responsibility around change management. One of the things that we can help, that a change management team can do, is to educate sponsors on that part of their role.
And I think also with that, it's important to have IT and the business area in the game together as far as that sponsorship role, because they're both making decisions that affect the project, and they're also part of that communication as well. So on to business process analysis. So real quick, the business process analysis, business process improvement. With business process analysis, it's documenting your as-is, and it's interesting. There are many times that we get on these projects or we get into them and we go to talk to people about what the as is or what the current state is, and I can characterize it essentially as business process by folklore. There's the person there's Jim, who's been here for 20 years, and anytime I have a problem with this portion of the project or this portion of my task, I go talk to Jim. Well, then Jim's retired, and then there goes all your process knowledge, right? So we're trying to make sure that we capture that and we dispel that business process by folklore. And the PAL process talks about the business process analysis being part of the submission with your stage 2, right? Your current state, your current processes. And then it goes on to talk about, say, business process improvement, which is your 2B, and it talks about that being needed in stage 3. Now, I'll get to the inherent difficulty of that in just a second, but with the business process improvement, first thing I would say with that is really try to employ a structured methodology with that. Lean Six Sigma, we use rapid process improvement. These are methodologies that you can apply so you can have consistent results, and it guides people through the process. When we're looking at business process improvement, one of the questions that we're really asking through that process is how can technology improve or automate or change the current processes? And so getting back to the inherent difficulty with having, say, like a business process improvement at stage 3 is that you have to talk about objectives. And I know our objectives are on the next slide, but what happens is how do you establish what you want to achieve or your measurable objectives if you're waiting until stage 3 to do the business process analysis, business process improvement? One of the things that we advocate with a BPR or BPI is that you start it as soon as you start stage one. Even if potentially, if before you hit stage one, bring someone in or get someone in your area to do the full documentation of the business processes and the BPI, because that drives and informs measurable objectives. And I want to move on to objectives.
Wait, not before I get my piece.
But not before.
Not before I get to tell you my take on business process analysis from a change management perspective. So we have to share a mic, so I just have to grab it from him when I want to talk. But the minute you bring people in to start documenting a to-be process, what do you think goes through their minds? There's something going to change. And especially if you are developing your to-be processes in conjunction, do an as-is, and then you move on to a to-be, and then to some requirements definition, the light bulb's going to go off for somebody that, wait a minute, this is going to have a big impact on the way I do my work. So if you're not using some change management principles, meaning that you're anticipating what some of that resistance is going to be, and I'll give you an example. I'm working on a project at a state agency right now, and we are redoing an expense claim process. And in one of the 2B sessions, one of the participants said, turned to her boss and said, "I'm not going to have a job when this is done." Fortunately, what we had done from an OCM, or org change management perspective, is we had actually anticipated that point of resistance, and we'd given the manager some talking points. And they rehearsed a change as she saw fit. We're consultants, and we don't have all of the right answers. But what we did is we said, you know what, you may have somebody who has this objection. Anticipate that. And here's one answer. No one's going to lose their job. We may look at duty statements. We may have to rejigger the way that people are actually doing their job, but we've thought about that, and we've got you covered. And that's all that person needed to hear. And we're not, the RFP's not even on the street yet. We're still developing the RFP as we're developing the 2B. So having change management early on in the project can help people adopt or get ready to adopt a project that's maybe a couple years out. But at least you're not going to get full-on resistance, when the vendor comes on board. Similarly for requirements, I'm going to let Eric talk about requirements now, but you want those people at the table so that they're there hearing what it is that you're planning on building, that they have some ownership of what you're going to actually procure.
Yeah. Sorry about that. It's just I'm so excited about objectives. I could hardly wait to get onto it. So a couple things about objectives. With the old feasibility study process, objectives were the equivalent of a box that you checked to move on. And as soon as you got past it, no one would look at it again until you got to if you even did it, the post-implementation evaluation report, the PIR, right? So essentially, you're on a 4-year or 6-year project, right? And no one looks at the objectives until the very end. And they come back and they go, hey, who has the objectives? Did we accomplish anything with that? Oh, hey, we did. It's by accident that you actually do it. Well, with the new stage gate process, objectives are linked throughout the entire process. And the key link that moves through it is that once you establish your objectives, as you move into the stage 2, and you're talking about the mid-level solution requirements, you have to actually directly link back to your objectives. And then same thing going into your stage 3. So essentially what happens is you're not forgetting about it. It's tied all the way through the process. That's why, again, we talk about the business process improvement and the importance of starting that so far in advance, because you need to clearly identify what it is you want to accomplish so that you can set up the objectives, so that you can have the requirements, so you can do the evaluation, so you can get the vendors you want. So requirements quiz. So one thing I talked about when I said the stage 2 is that they have mid-level solution requirements. And that was a rather interesting term for us when we saw that come out in the guidance. Why would you specify mid-level solution requirements when you're doing your stage 2? Why not just requirements, right? So we went and we looked at, they had all the feasibility study reports that were up on the Department of Technology website for project tracking. We pulled all down all the feasibility study reports down that were in the $3 million to $9 million price range, which is where a lot of projects kind of reside. And we want to see how many requirements they had to estimate scope, schedule, and cost. This is technical requirements, or functional requirements, non-functional requirements, transition requirements, all in the FSR. So I'm just going to put all those up. So show of hands, How many think that there were between 1 and 49 requirements? How about 50 to 99? 100 to 200? More than 200? Of course, there were 51 requirements. An average of 51 requirements. How do you estimate scope, schedule, cost, staffing needs, transition needs, everything that you need with 51 requirements? Well, once you go and look at that, you begin to realize, that's why they're talking about mid-level solution requirements. They want more detail. But more isn't always better. And this isn't about requirements gathering, but I will talk about some of the things that we do that help us with requirements. And again, it all comes back to starting that business process improvement or business process assessment very early on. Because one of the things I have in here, it's your standard swim lane diagram. We have our swim lanes with our roles in there, and we have the process boxes, and we have decision boxes. And then what we did is we highlighted one of the decision boxes red. And we exploded that out into a screenshot of the existing Stage 2 template. And the point is on this, what they want you to do in the mid-level solution requirements is they want you to tie back to the business process. What we like to do is if you have well-documented business processes, you have the to-be state set up, then what we do is you can modify the template as you see fit, and we add in actual business process steps. Because what we want to do as we move through and we do the mid-level solution requirements is that we want to identify what we're actually tying to make sure that we're actually applying automation at the steps that are necessary. The other thing is this. You look at the review process and you get done with it. Now you've got 200 or 300 or a whole lot of requirements. And you send that back out to your staff or your people to review, or you send it over to CDT and it's cold for them. How are they expected to sift through 200 plus requirements and follow it and figure out whether it's complete or not? It's an almost impossible task. That's why we like marrying the business processes to the actual requirements. The other thing is, though, and there's a caveat with the requirements. And the mid-level solution requirements, it's kind of where people get all excited because you're starting to talk about what's going to happen. And you set yourself up for a contest. And what happens is I liken it to essentially going car shopping. But you're going car shopping and you don't have a budget. Now that's all the people who are specifying the requirements. So they walk on into the lot and the vendor says, or the car salesman says, you want to have a sunroof? Sure. You want nav? Absolutely. You want to have satellite and everything else that goes along with it, radio? Yes, yes, ABS, all that stuff. You throw it on there and you ask those questions. Of course people are going to want those things, right? Who isn't going to want them? And then they want to get in the car and they want to drive off. But then you walk over to, say, the project sponsor, and you give them the price tag. And you say, hey, this is going to be a $22 million project. Whoa, hang on. We only had about $5 million specified for this, right? So again, back to the organizational change management aspects of it as well. It's important to go through and figure out kind of what the reasonable expectations are given your constraints of budget potentially or scope so that you can actually set the realistic expectations for the requirements so that you can have a successful project. So, I want to talk just a brief second about market research and financial analysis. So, with the market research, one of the things that we find is the most important tool out there is the RFI, the request for information. And I went through and I confirmed this. The State Contracting Manual is Volume 3, is a 388-page document that governs all contracting with the state of California. In that document, the request for information has one sentence. That's it. And the beautiful thing about that is that it is the least governed activity in the entire procurement process. And it makes it easy for you to get anything you want, any way you want, any fashion you want, to get it out there so that you can actually, the benefit of it, you get it out there so that now you let the vendors know, hey, community, there's something we're doing. And now also you can get their feedback, and there's some benefits to that. One of the things is, we're talking about the car shopping aspect of it. You may have on your requirements something that you think is ungodly expensive or too difficult to do. And the vendors communicate back and say, no, actually we've done that before and it's really simple and here's how. Okay, great, that's fabulous. But then you may think something that's totally simple. Well, then that thing's going to go out there and it's going to cost you 80% of your project budget. So it's important to get that feedback to start making those decisions about what's in scope and what's out of scope. The other thing about the RFI, just a caveat on it, is that even though it isn't governed and you can go out there and you can get all this response, the vendor community, when they respond to it, they're responding to it out of the goodness of their own heart, basically, for lack of a better way of saying it. They don't get paid for it. There's no real benefit in it other than the fact that now you know that you're both on the process. But so when you develop an RFI, ask only the essential questions that you need to get answered out there. The other thing about that is it's kind of like, so because you want to get responses. As soon as you get responses, then you've got your foot in the door with the vendor community, and then you can continue to ask questions and continue to refine so that you get the best requirements and scope that you can. It's kind of like, I mean, basically, you want to ask the vendor for a date first before you ask them to get married. And you don't want to ask them to get married with an RFI because they're never going to respond to that, right? The final thing I want to talk about is financial analysis. And we look at all these projects that are 9 million, 10 million, 3 million, whatever they may be, and it's funny. There's an inherent tug between project costs and delegated cost thresholds. And what happens is everyone wants to have, it's the, whatever you do, don't make me have a reportable project, right? But there's some problems with that. And one of the problems is that, you look at the budget, and so CDT, as soon as they get the financial analysis worksheets, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to look at it and they're going to say, do you have enough state staff on this thing allocated to be serious about having success? Well, state staff, a fully loaded state resource, isn't cheap, right? The overhead rates are running anywhere between 41 and 47%, depending upon what that staff role is. So if you have an $80,000 a year staff member, you're looking at $116,000 a year for a PY on that resource in the project cost. Well, if your delegated cost threshold is, say, $1 million, which seems like a lot. You throw on technology costs, so software costs, you throw on configuration costs, and you throw on a properly staffed project for change management, training, implementation, all the things that happen with that, it's so easy to trigger that delegated cost threshold. So I guess my caveat on financial analysis worksheets is, one, to not be afraid of the delegated cost threshold. We're finding that CDT is increasingly willing to work with the state. It's becoming a very good partnership. And the other thing is make sure you staff those projects with the right amount of people. Because if you don't, you're going to set yourself up for failure on that. And it's very important. So at that, I want to turn it over to Randy to tie us in a little bit more with change management.
Okay. I'm going to switch places with you so I can see the screen a little bit better. So as I said, this is not change management training, even though I'm a certified instructor, but I saw that there were about a third of the hands that went up that had change management experience. So I do want to give sort of the change management 101 for those who might not be familiar with what exactly do we mean when we're talking about organizational change management. So that is distinct from technical change management. So if there are IT folks in the room, we're not talking about configuration and the process by which you make changes to a system. We're talking about the people side of change. So very succinctly, when we think about change, we have our current state. We're going to go through some sort of transition to some sort of future state. And we're familiar with project management and that discipline and what that entails, and it's about making sure that all the technical pieces of the project line up and that your risks and issues are identified. Change management is looking at the people side of that equation. Because ultimately, if you're going to achieve some sort of benefit from your project, which is your objectives that you've identified, people have to change. And if you can take one thing from this 45 minutes, I would suggest that you take this. Organizations don't change, individuals do. If we don't think about the individuals, if we don't apply change management, we are presuming that we're going through this whole process to get to some sort of benefit. I mean, if we can't identify the benefit, then why bother with the project, right? But if we don't apply change management, we're going to go from the current state through some transition that's quite a bit longer than maybe we anticipated, and it's bumpy. And when we finally do get to our future state, it's full of holes and it doesn't measure up to what we thought it was going to be. So that's the argument, and this is material from the ProSci class that I teach. So again, I just want to I want to emphasize it's not the only methodology out there, and most change management methodologies are going to have some similar approach. And so I'm not arguing necessarily for PROSCI, I'm arguing for adopting some sort of methodical approach to the people side of change. So I want to ask everybody, since I know you just came from a far more interactive session than this one, and you've been sitting there, you answered a couple of our questions, but I do want you, if you have something to write down, you can write it down, otherwise you can just do this in your head. But this is an exercise I do in my classes called the 4 Ps. It's project, purpose, particulars, and people. So I want you to think about the project that you're here to contemplate. And then I want you to think about the purpose of that project. What are the objectives? What are you trying to achieve? Then particulars, what are you changing? And then finally, people. So to give you a little more concrete example, so we've got project XYZ. You are trying to achieve some efficiencies, provide better service. I hope your objectives are a little more smart, measurable than those are. But you know, there's something that you're trying to achieve by this project, and that's your outcome. The particulars are all of the things that we've been talking about around the solution, the technical solution, the process improvements. There may be policy changes that are required. There could even be legislative changes required. It may require reorganization of, depending on the scope of your project and the breadth of how many divisions it covers. Maybe there's some reorganization. Does it require looking at duty statements? So all of those things are the particulars about what you're changing. And then the people, executives, managers, and supervisors, and all of your staff, your line staff in different units. So just think about that for just a second. And then I'm going to ask you a question. What % of your project outcomes, so I'll go back to here, the purpose in this column right here, what % of these is dependent on people changing how they do their work? Anyone? Okay, I heard 100. This is not a trick question. It could be less than 100, and I'll give you an example. If you have 2 IT staff that need to push a security patch out over the weekend so that your network stays secure, the objective that they've achieved is making sure that we don't have intruders into our network, and it really didn't affect that many people. So there weren't that many people that had to change the way they do their work in order to achieve that objective. So the answer is not by default 100. But in the projects that Erica was talking about, those $3 to $9 million dollar projects, you're probably affecting quite a few people. And those people are going to have to change the way that they do their work. So if people don't change how they do their job, then it really doesn't matter what technology we put into place. If we develop 2B process maps, but nobody follows them, they just ignore them and try to do things the old way anyway. So, and you'd be surprised at how often that actually happens. Even though you've come up with a new 2B process and you think, this is gonna work so much better. I did a project for a state agency, which shall not be named, where the chief accounting officer kept, despite the fact that they put in this really nice new big ERP system, she kept a spreadsheet of purchase orders on her desktop because she didn't trust the system reports to do it. So getting people to adopt the new way of doing things means that you're reaping the full benefits of the system. So if people don't change, that's what's in yellow here, if people don't change how they do their job, we ultimately won't achieve what we set out to do from the beginning. So that's not to say you're not going to get some benefit. That's going to say that whatever that you have suppose that you're going to achieve, like in your FSR in the old world, or whatever benefits you have said that you're going to achieve, if you don't have all the people on board, you're probably not going to hit that mark. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that people matter, and I will give you a little bit of what the PROSCI ADKAR change model suggests. ADKAR is a model of individual change. ADKAR is an acronym that stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So awareness is not awareness of the change. It's not awareness that the change is happening. It's awareness of why we're doing it. It goes back to that business objective. So there must be a reason that we're doing the change, and what is it, and do people know it? Again, that's the #1 reason projects fail, is because people don't know why we're doing a project. So they resist it. The model suggests that you have to go through each of these 5 stages in order to completely adopt and use a new solution. So what we're trying to get to is ability. That's the ability to use this new system and these new processes and operate in your new environment. Before we get there, we have to have desire. Now, desire is kind of a funky word. I think they chose it because it made the acronym sound better than commitment, because ADKAR doesn't really sound all that great. But desire is essentially, it's a personal decision to support the change. So that doesn't mean that everyone is going to love absolutely every solution. And that's when I think people first hear about the ADKAR model, if you've heard of it. How many have heard of the ADKAR model? So a few of you. I think a lot of people, when they hear of the ADKAR model and they hear desire, it's like, how am I going to get my employees to actually want this? It doesn't have to be that they really want it. It means that they're going to make a personal decision, a commitment to support it. Now, I may not like what's happening, and I think maybe it could be better, but yeah, I'm going to go along with it. If you can get them there, then you can work on the knowledge and the ability. And that's often what we jump to, is we think, oh, well, if we just train them how to use this new system, we train them in the new process, then they'll be fine. But what you're really doing is you're jumping straight to knowledge. You're assuming they know why you're doing it. You're assuming that they have made a personal commitment to do it. So how does all this, and what's that little triangle over there in the corner? And I'm going to check my time here. I've got 7 minutes. That little triangle there over in the corner suggests that change management is one leg of a triangle that's necessary for a project to succeed. So if you have the slides for this, it's hard to read up here, but what's in the middle of that triangle are meeting your objectives, being on time, on budget, and realizing some return on investment, supported by 3 legs of that stool. Leadership and sponsorship, which I talked about briefly, that has to be there. Project management, which there are probably a lot of PMPs in the room other than Eric and me. Project management is necessary, and then change management is the 3rd leg of that stool. And without if any one of them is missing, you're not going to achieve what's on the stool. What the ADKAR model says is this is individual change. The sum of individual change and getting everyone to ability is what's going to lead you to organizational change and organizational success. So that makes sense hopefully, from a project perspective. And so we have seen a lot of RFPs coming out for implementation projects, and OCM, or organizational change management, has been emphasized a lot. But a lot of times it doesn't happen until you get to actually hiring an integrator or your solution vendor. So what we're suggesting is that you start thinking about change management earlier, even at the beginning of the PAL process. So business analysis, Eric characterized the business analysis as basically putting together objectives. From a change management standpoint, that's where you start awareness building. That's where you're looking at, why are we doing this? What are the organizational impacts? What are the business reasons for this project? Start right then letting people know and getting people involved in what's happening and why you're even going down this path. You get to stage 2, let's assume that you have a certain level of awareness with staff, and you start that as-is documentation and that to-be process, building your new environment. That's when you're going to start to identify some individual impacts. What's in it for me, WIFM, right? What's in it for me? Or if your people don't see something that's in it for them, maybe it's just what's required of them. This is the new process. This is the law. This is the new policy. And this is what we have to do to implement that policy. It's also where you can start setting expectations. So back to Eric's car analogy, and you don't want them buying the Cadillac when you only have the budget for a Volkswagen. You can start setting expectations about what they will and they won't get during the alternatives analysis and figuring out what that to-be looks like. So awareness and desire. Now, knowledge, that K, that really is the training. You're not going to get there during the PAL process because you're not actually going to be implementing anything. You don't have anything built to train on. But you can start with awareness and desire. So what do you do during the rest of this? Just keep employees informed and involved. So in the absence of good information, people make stuff up. So if you are doing market research and you're not letting people know, oh, well, this vendor came back with this idea and this solution, and what do you think about it? And having that dialogue, they're still going to know that you got XYZ firm to provide a response, and they'll start whispering, well, that means it's going to be like this, it's going to be like this. The truth about awareness and desire and the whole ADKAR model, it's not as linear as it sounds, even if you've read the book. It sounds very linear, and oh, we achieve awareness, we're there, we're good, and then we just achieve desire, and we're good, and then we move on to knowledge. That's not the way life works. Awareness and desire both, they go up and down. With each new piece of information, my awareness of why we're doing it either is strengthened a little bit or maybe weakened a little bit if I get a piece of information that is contradictory. My personal commitment to it might change as I learn about what is the new business process actually going to be like. Wait, you're going to have me do that? I don't know if I like that. So that awareness and desire is going to fluctuate until you get to the actual project. If you have a structured approach to change management, you can at least anticipate what some of the resistance is going to be and help your managers and supervisors to understand their role in change management and help your executives understand their critical role in change management. So I'm almost out of time here, so I'm going to try to wrap up. But we have OCM at the center of this, and these are activities that we suggest are critical to making the PAL process as close to that optimal time frame as you can, whether that's 2 years or 1 year or something less than 4 years, hopefully, or 6, or I've heard of 10-year procurements. Governance, executives understand what their role is with regard to executive decisions. We need to make sure that they also understand the importance of being active and visible and building a coalition of people who are going to support the project and talking directly with employees about why you're doing it. Business process analysis, make sure when the minute you bring people into a room, you're doing change management at some degree, whether you realize it or not. It's just a question of, are you doing it well? Because they're going to walk out of the room drawing conclusions about what's changing. So you want to make sure that you have the right people in the room. Don't exclude people who are critical. Make sure they're there to help you develop the new business processes. The objectives are why you're doing the project. The requirements, again, have the subject matter experts at the table so that they can buy into it. And as you're doing market research and the financial analysis, make sure you keep people informed and involved so that you have a baseline of OCM throughout the PAL process so that when you do get that solution vendor on board, you're that much more ready to be successful. So I think I'm out of time. Do we have time for questions? Nope. We have about a minute. So I was trying to talk very quickly there at the end. Any questions from the audience?
So if you do happen to have any questions, I know we went through a lot very quickly. We really just scratched the surface on each and every one of these topics, and I apologize for that. Thank you. So if you want to talk more about it, again, our contact information is up here. Feel free to reach out for us. We both love these topics, and we're eager to help you in any way possible on it. So thank you very much.